speaker, Robert Behnke, Bob has more than 20 years experience in information technology and has more than 20 years experience in public transit systems. He invented the smart jitney, smart community concept, and you have to know that anybody who would come to this conference and use the word smart not once but twice in the same phrase has to have a hell of a lot of guts. Let's welcome Bob. Thank you.
Firstly, I need a volunteer who will turn the slide projector because I don't have a remote cord here. Thank you. Just hit the forward button and turn on the light. Thank you. I put together a couple of slides here to have a little bit of fun and to organize my thoughts a little bit. I was a little disappointed in the debate last night, which wasn't a debate. I mean, I like to see the high school type debate that says, resolve. The bus and rail establishment of Portland, Oregon has been systematically misleading the media, elected officials, and the public. You know, true or false. And that's the kind of debate I would have liked to have seen. You know which side Earl Blumenauer would have been on. I would have been on the other side. You all know the story of the Emperor's New Clothes. The one twist, there's a couple of twists to it, but one of them is the little boy down there pointed out that he was naked. Okay? The other thing that's to know is the little boy didn't make any money on the deal. The people who made a lot of money on this deal were the tailors and the clothes designers. Okay? And Earl Blumenauer and his group of people are the clothes designers and the tailors in the Emperor's New Clothes story. Okay? And you're dealing with those people. When Cliff says you don't want to talk to too many public officials, it's because they're part of that process. They're part of the people who made the Emperor's New Clothes. And if Earl were giving a talk about the Emperor's New Clothes, he would point out the advantages of the new clothes. One, stain resistant, wrinkle resistant. It saves energy because you don't have to wash it. And it cleans up the air because you don't have to use dry cleaning chemicals. Okay? The fact that warmth doesn't enter into the equation, the measure of effectiveness, is the things that are convenient for him to use. He gave some, he mentioned last night, I don't remember the exact numbers, but 22-year-old, 35-year-old are flocking to Portland in droves because they like our quality of life. Okay? I don't know where that statistic comes from, and he used Portland. Sometimes he was referring to the city, sometimes he was referring to downtown, sometimes he was referring to the region. It depended on what point he was trying to prove. And I would point out that there's another statistic that says Portland's school population, the city of Portland school population is declining very rapidly. So the people that are being brought in this 21 to 35-year age group are either gay or eunuchs, you know, or there's something wrong with the data. Next slide, please. One of the things when you're involved in a debate on the merits of a new rail project or a new bus rapid transit project is the people that are in favor of it always like to talk about the problems. You know, we have trouble right here in River City, pool. You know, it's again, you talk about the problems, and any statistics that come out, they really talk about the problems, you know, how bad it is. How Amtrak is only getting, over 25 years, only got less money than a highway project up in Boston, you know, that kind of a thing. You have to break away from that a little bit. Next slide, please. Public transportation, particularly here in the Portland area, kind of has a tiger by the tail. They have a commitment, and they try and portray themselves as very balanced. It's either the all highways folks or the people that are in favor of some highway and some public transportation. You know, and clearly you know which side they're on, even though they spend highway projects they consider road access to light rail stations, parking garages, and a whole bunch of other things are considered road projects, and that's part of their balance. Okay. There's a third school. And the author of the book, Edge Cities, Joel Giroux, was invited to an American Public Transit Association annual meeting a couple of years ago, like 4 or 5 years ago. And he said, you know, Plan A to solving our transportation problems is to pave everything. Build roads, nothing but roads all over the place. Everybody agrees that that's not too bright. Okay? Plan B is to use transportation, buses, trains, big box type transportation that are well suited for high density areas where fewer and fewer people are living. And that doesn't make much sense either. The thing that you really want to do is to use some new technologies, pagers, cell phones, and other things, to match up would-be riders and would-be drivers with this inventory of empty seats that's constantly running around the highway, and do it safely. And the market research says that the new technologies that are available today, you could develop a system of wireless communication and jitneys that would dramatically reduce traffic congestion without building either more light rail lines, either more bus rapid transit lines, or even more highway. We could get much more effective use out of the vehicles we have right now. And I've been working on this project for a number of years. Next slide, please. When you're looking at trip data, you have to realize that work trips represent only about 20% of the total number of trips. When you talk about a public transit system, you have to be talking about the totality of trips. But the work transit trips are very important because, as the next slide shows, our travel is highly peaked, and it's also highly directional. We have a small number of people, relatively, like 10% or less, that live and work in the central city. They take relatively short trips, and bus and rail is very convenient because the network, the area is kind of compact, and the densities are pretty high. The people who live and work in the suburbs, in Washington County where I live, where Intel has the state's largest employer, it's almost impossible to get to their job site by public transportation, and that's convenient for the workers. Even though they've all given free bus passes, I think, Mel, what was the number? What percentage of them use transit to get to work?
1%.
Yeah, they get free bus passes, they can use transit anyway, and 1% of them use public transportation to get to work at Intel. Okay? But the highly peaked and highly directional thing, the people that commute between the suburbs and the central city, or the city and the suburb, the trips are long and highly peaked and highly directional. And it's almost impossible. The trains may be full in one direction, but they're empty in the other, give you a 50% occupancy rate. And so, I think Randall talked the other day about the average occupancy rate of our light rail lines is something on the order of 20 or 25%. Peaked in a couple of hours, but the rest of the time. And one of the great breakthroughs in public transportation, people were very upset about seeing these buses going out in the suburbs with only 1 or 2 passengers on them, these big buses. So the breakthrough came is they made the windows so you couldn't see in the bus. Okay? That's a technology breakthrough. Next slide, please. Our transit plan is important. Our bus and rail people, okay, use statistics like a drunk use a lamppost. Not for illumination, but for support. Okay? And that's an old Mark Twain line. I had, over on the side, you'll see a blue sheet here that talks about some of the data about Oregon. And you'll notice that my name is on the bottom of it. It's written out. My email address, my phone number is on it. If anybody finds I've made a mistake, please contact me and let me know. Okay? I go to bed at night knowing that nobody out here can really say that I'm lying about some of these numbers. I'm not sure that Earl Blumenauer can say that kind of thing. Okay? There's a systematic pattern. At the state level, we set up something called the Oregon Progress Board. And they had a number of milestones, a number of markers to indicate how well we are doing on reducing congestion, reducing the use of single occupant automobile. And we have a separate agency called the Oregon Progress Board. In 1991, they came out with a report, and it said, as far as the overall state went in reducing vehicle miles traveled per capita, F. That means that the people who designed our rail project, the people who designed our expansion of the bus system, who have concentrated on serving the downtown area, which is not growing, they made the scores up. And they were the ones that said on their own performance, we have failed an F in terms of controlling the number of vehicle miles traveled per capita. They wanted to increase the number of people who were using multi-occupant vehicles to commute to work. They gave themselves an F on this number. Okay? It's available. I mean, this is historical data. And then they wanted to maintain the percentage of miles of limited access highways in Oregon urban areas that are congested. They wanted to keep it at 48%. Okay? Our congested areas, our congestion is going up very, very rapidly. I think one of the numbers is we're 8th or 9th most congested freeway state in the country now, according to a study in the University of North Carolina. Next slide, please. One of the big lies that the rail folks advocate is they don't like to talk about capital costs. They want to talk about the operating costs, okay? And so the big white elephant there, they don't talk about how much it costs to buy it and how much the monthly mortgage payment is. What they want to talk about is the input, the output, the electricity, the fuel, etc., the minor kind of problems. The thing is, when you want to start looking at any kind of alternatives, when you want to compare alternatives, you have to systematically include the capital costs as well as the operating costs. And I can think of no greater innovation that we could do in the United States would be than to have the Federal Transit Administration say, you have to report total costs, not just operating costs. You have to report total costs in order to get some semblance of reality into the decision-making process that's going on. Next slide. Another thing that we could do is to say, we're going to limit the amount of subsidies on any particular transit service, transit route. You can cut the number. There's a distribution. One of the studies that Tony Gomez-Ibanez of Harvard did, one of the rail people project that rail likes to do, and Portland used, TriMet used very extensively, is said, look, we have this light rail line, and it has an 80% fare box recovery, or a 30%, 40% fare box recovery, and our average bus system has only a 10% fare box recovery. I mean, it's obvious that light rail makes sense. Well, Professor Gomez-Ibanez said, you have to look at it a little bit differently. What you really have to do is to compare the light rail to the bus lines it replaced. And if you look at the bus lines that it replaced in that single corridor, that they had an even higher fare box recovery than the light rail. And that when you selectively pull out, what you have to do is compare apples and apples. You can't mislead the statistics here. You have to look at the bus lines that were replaced by the rail, how they were performing, and you can't just look at comparing it to the average. It's an old statistical trick, but we're masters at it here in the Portland area. Next slide. When you have a project, you know, there are the people, the transit planners have a very tight organization. They have the words are distributed on how to sell projects all around the country. Most cities, most counties, most local governments don't have that kind of expertise. And one of the things you want to do, if you can possibly do it, is to get a second opinion on a project. We have a project coming in now that's seeking funding. It's called the commuter rail line between Wilsonville and Beaverton, downtown Beaverton, okay? You can just look at the numbers and look at the area. It is a real waste. I mean, it's a low-density area to another low-density area. There happens to be a commuter rail line there, a freight line, and they want to use this thing across the surface street. It's a disaster. Peter Gordon at USC in 1980, he forecast that the light rail project in Portland was going to have a far lower ridership than our proponents said it would have. And he had a very simple model. He looked at population densities, he looked at workforce, he looked at annual incomes, and he looked at car ownership, and he plugged those things in, and he came out with a number and said, this is what it's going to be, and everybody in Portland said, he's crazy. Okay? When the rail opened, and 2 years later, his number was right on the money. It takes 4 hours with a calculator to compute that number, and it was right on the money, and Portland planners' estimates were way off base. I tried to make a suggestion to the county commissioners in Washington County, where this project is going in. Why did you bring Peter Gordon up for a day? You know, rather than spending $100 million on this project that has ridership numbers that are so inflated, and every project, transit project in the Portland area has had inflated ridership project, and they've underestimated the subsidies in the past. Why do you bring Peter Gordon in to have a presentation? You can't do it. If you can do it, if you ever can get that kind of an opportunity and get some of these experts in, to give a second opinion on a project, you really ought to go out and do it. That's all. If you're trying to fight any kind of a project, a rail transit project, or a bus rapid transit project, or another thing, remember that the people you're dealing with are the people that designed the clothing and manufactured the clothing for the emperor. Okay? You're not going to change their minds. It's a mindset. As Cliff Sled said, and he did very, very successfully in Honolulu in fighting the rail project. He managed to get on the 7 o'clock news and the 6 o'clock news all the time with people carrying signs and big orange pink buttons and cost on them, you know. And people up in Clark County, they named it the gravy train, the light rail project up there. There were a couple of catchphrases that were used to get, and the gravy train sign was all over the place. And these are the projects that were successful. But the thing you're fighting is they don't hesitate to tell untruths. You know, they don't hesitate to mislead the people and the press. They have a lot of money working for them, and it's an uphill battle to solve the rail project. They only have to win once. And once they can get the guy to approve the first little design project, Robert Moses said, to drive the first fight, they look bad if they change their mind anytime after that. That's it. Question? Yes, sir.
I noticed that with both you and previous speaker, you talked about fighting projects. But as you know, in every project they do either some kind of an analysis or some kind of a document that points out the alternatives. Do you ever fight a project with another transit alternative that may perhaps be more cost beneficial?
We try. Most of the times they're never allowed to consider it. They have a straw man or two. They have an all-bus system where they stack the data against it, you know. And for example, we have a project, some of you took the tour the other day, went out to Washington County, and you looked at the project out there. What's it called, Mel?
The rail station.
What station?
Orenco?
Orenco Station. The light rail line that goes out there. I live in that nearby there. And when they first proposed that West Side Rail project, it didn't meet the federal criteria that said on what the cost per new rider was going to be. Okay? And so what they did is they divided the project into two parts. Part A, which stopped in Beaverton, where I live, and that did meet the criteria. And Part B, which did not. So they went into Part A, they got the money to do that, and they built that project. And then they had the laws passed so that if you were making an add-on to an existing system, you didn't have to worry about meeting the criteria. I mean, they're dealing from the bottom of the deck all the time. There are alternatives. They never get to the table because what you're not competing against is nylon and rayon. You're competing against the Emperor's new clothes.
Well put.
Okay? Yes?
Have you ever heard of a project getting stopped or killed after they've already got the federal funding?
Well, in Honolulu, they got funding to do some of the planning process, and they were, you know, had to draft environmental impact statements. So, you know, not total funding to be built.
Right.
Full funding agreement. That's
Full funding agreement. Craig?
Wow, the Mountain Freeway was killed.
Oh, the highway project was killed. Yeah, they had the funding and they transferred it into the rail project. Yeah, I don't know about a rail project that was killed. Yes.
In Seattle, we've been fighting a rail program for some time, probably 30 years. And recently, the battle was at the federal level dealing with a full funding grant agreement for the rail program. And it amounted to $500 million commitment in the full funding grant agreement. In that process, we learned, and one of our brightest young politicians, a King County Council member, began to realize that the crux of this is the way Congress has set up pots of money in the House of Representatives Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which I believe and am told is the largest committee in Congress with the largest budget, second only to national defense. And his point was, he wrote about a two-page paper and tried to get it introduced to our congressional delegation on the subject of New Start money, seeing if there could be interested in movement in that committee to redefine the New Start money to allow mode competition, i.e. bus rapid transit to compete with the proposed rail programs on a performance basis. And I'm just suggesting to this group, and there's probably people here that know a whole lot more about what I'm talking about than I do, that it may become a purpose of this group nationally to try to advance that effort. Because in Congress identifying this pot of money, they have made a mode decision on behalf of the people in this country. And there is a list, and I think this chart up here speaks to it, of 75 or 100 cities that none of us would ever think about rail, but they're thinking about rail because the money is there, is my point. And I don't know if anybody cares to speak to this or...
I think you set a great setup for Tom here, because he's an expert on that one.
I'll sit down.
And thank you very, very much. Information technology and has more than 20 years experience in public transit systems. He invented the smart jitney